Welcome to our second wonderful day of our panels and our discussions. We're so grateful for you being here, and we're grateful for the wonderful discussions that happened yesterday, and hope that today will continue in this important work that we're doing. To start out with, in terms of what we're going to be doing today, Catherine Marshall will give us a welcome and a recap from day one. So I'll turn the time over to Catherine.
Thank you, Mariana, and thank you also for helping to keep these trains moving as we move through a rather complex schedule. My mission is a very quick recap of where we are as of the end of yesterday. Many of you were there, though with breakout sessions, one can't be everywhere at once. First of all, on a very practical note, ideally, in today's technology world, we would be doing this hybrid, but we're not doing this hybrid for a variety of reasons, but every session is being recorded, and the recordings of each session will be available on the G20 Interfaith website soon. It was suggested that I say weeks as opposed to days, but there are recordings, and there will also be some kind of summary of each of the sessions that we'll see what we actually do with that. But the point is that, first of all, we are aware that many will be looking at and focusing on the discussions here after we have all left. And secondly, that there is a very conscious effort to try to capture the ideas and the information that is shared here. Secondly, the theme yesterday was clearly about the unity in diversity. But another theme that came through in many ways was the notion of bridges. That what we are doing is we're trying to build bridges. Clearly, bridges among different traditions, bridges within traditions, bridges among nations, and bridges between the different so-called sectors of the world. The governmental, the secular, the religious, the civil society, the private sector. In many references came out during the day yesterday, two different bridges. Stepping back a little bit, the pre-event, which took place on Sunday night, was a very important introduction to this forum, and particularly allowed us to honor and to savor the Baha'i spiritual traditions and their hospitality, which we have seen throughout, but also to have a much clearer picture of the Indian perspective through His Excellency Harsh Shringla, where he laid out very much the Indian vision for the G20, which in his description is above all inclusive. It is to take this opportunity of India's presidency of the G20, which is probably a 1 in 20 year event, and to use it to have events in 50 cities of the country, to have meetings with all kinds of citizens of India, and thus to give them an understanding and a picture of how India and its global leadership fits into the broader context. He was also, I think, very sober and very clear about the challenges of the moment. And particularly the geopolitical situation, which is a very large cloud over the G20 process. It's linked to the war in Ukraine, to many other kinds of tensions and rivalries within the G20 group, which, to remind us, is an expansion of the notion of the G2 or of the G7, G8 to the G20. In other words, bringing in a larger group of nations into a sort of core decision-making body. But that ideal is very much challenged today. And we heard a sense of the magnitude of the G20 agenda with today's crises, which we'll be turning to this morning, but also the challenge that faces the chair, the president of the G20. We heard, of course, the warm welcome comments, but then we moved on to what was, in many senses, a spiritual, religious presentation in the first panel, where we were struck, I think, by the difference in voice and cadence, but the similarities in basic messages, the sense of unity, but the celebration of diversity. I think those were important common themes that come with the interconnectedness that all forms of life, to love, to dare, to sacrifice, to work together, those were sort of seen as essential spiritual messages. There was also, though, a recognition that was already a beginning of some reflection on spiritual versus religious and what the differences and the similarities are. But there was also a set of themes that recognized the risks and dangers that are associated with the religious focus, the role of religion in society and the complexities around it. And from that came what to me was an interesting theme, which was the challenges that we heard from a number of the leaders, including from Aza Karam, from Religions for Peace, that faith leaders need to respond and need themselves to be accountable and responsible. One theme that came out from David Saperstein, Rabbi Saperstein particularly, was a reminder that one of the leading issues in today's G20 agenda is the indebtedness of so many countries in the world, but a reminder of the Jubilee 2000 and the leading role that religious institutions played in transforming what was a very technical, almost sacredly technical issue into a moral issue. And again, that was a theme that resonated, that debt and the indebtedness of poor countries, the inequalities in the world, are very much a moral issue. So with the new debt crisis, we see new challenges and new opportunities to the religious faith communities, but also to the G20 interfaith, because that is one of the leading issues within the G20. We moved on there to the theme of partnerships, and partnerships was, again, it is right in the title, the beginning of the title of the G20 Interfaith event here, but also in a number of the discussions. And it began to unravel the complexities that are involved in partnerships, particularly where there are inequalities in power, imbalances in power relationships. In that discussion, one of the themes that came out was the special moment for India, this almost ironic moment that the announcement has just come out that India's population has surpassed China's, making India the leading country in terms of population in the world. But again, without as much reflection as people would like to see of what that means, particularly in terms of the enormous population of children, which comes back to one of the core themes of the event here. So this is a moment for India in terms of demography, but it is also a moment of responsibility. There were a lot of discussions of the intersectoral issues, the roles of religion vis-a-vis government, vis-a-vis civil society. And we had one government leader, USAID, focused very much on these, again, religious engagement as a theme of the United States government. And it is a theme, though articulated in different ways, of different governments that are part of the G20. So I think that is an important theme, the ways in which the intersectoral partnerships evolve. And we were very much reminded repeatedly about the idea of co-creation, of working together across these barriers, again, coming back to this theme of bridges. The day ended with two sets of breakout sessions, one on technology, on vulnerable communities, on women, on child dignity, and on trafficking. And I would mention here that the sixth breakout session was planned because it is such a critical issue, the questions of food and food security, because that is such a large focus of so many religious communities throughout history and today. However, just by chance of people who couldn't make it, we did not have the session on food security, but would highlight that that is a strong continuing theme. I won't try to summarize, and I was, of course, not in all the sessions, and I thank the note takers very much for their assistance. The technology session, what I hear is that it was a very interesting session, that it laid out the problems, that the challenges, the opportunities that are involved in technology, but as is so often the case, articulating and situating the religious within this fast-moving world is something of a challenge. The session on vulnerable communities focused particularly, I think, on the challenge of the displaced more than at any time since World War II, over 100 million people displaced. The challenges both for the host communities, for the international communities, and the concerns as we look forward. The session on women was, I think, the largest panel, and with a wide variety of very informed voices, with many challenges, some of the challenges seemingly obvious, but at least there was some recognition that there really are challenges within the religious worlds. It was articulated as equity versus equality, which brought forth some debate as to what that signifies. But the questions of women's roles, gender issues within the religious world, more than within the G20 orbit, was clearly the focus there. And finally, in the first group, there was child dignity. I'm on the second group, child dignity, where again the focus was very much on children, both on the vulnerability of children and how religious communities can deal with that, but also the opportunities that the voices of children and their role represents. So the final session focused on trafficking, and there were some interesting themes that came out of that discussion. I would note and highlight a little bit trafficking, because going all the way back to the Argentina meeting some years ago, the theme of the religious roles in addressing the trafficking challenges has been one of the major themes, one of the major items that the G20 Interfaith has focused on. One thing that emerged, or some ideas that emerged, were the need for an engagement between government and religious sectors in addressing both the law enforcement and the other aspects. The need to deal with the huge amounts of money that are involved to make trafficking more expensive. To deal with the digital space comes back to technology, the issue of the moral compass, and clearly the issues of prevention and rehabilitation, but always with this underlying sense that until there is a clear recognition of the need to deal with poverty and desperation, there will always be some forms of trafficking. And so it is always important to go back to the root causes. So those are just some very quick notes to situate us as we start the second day of this event.